Okay, so this video might not be fully thought through, just because I don't have the time, but it serves a very important purpose, and definitely I need a lot of input from your side to maybe solve the mystery of the actual display quality of the Sony Xperia XZ3. Because while in my preview I still said it's a top-notch display on par with the Note 9, it deserves 5 gold stars, it's pretty much flawless. I already back then noticed one thing that I just didn't know of what to do with it yet, and then I read the comments and things got a little bit clearer, or actually say less clear, because in especially German forums already, I didn't really check international ones, there is talk going on about the gray whale that is actually such a big issue that it's a deal breaker for some people. And I'm definitely not gonna try to convince you in this video it is a thing or it's not a thing. And what I want to do though is give you some numbers in terms of brightness. It's not really a scientific test or anything like that, some real life samples so we can compare and see if it might be an issue for you or not. And therefore I actually also contacted Sony, at least their German press agency, to ask them what they know about it. They didn't really know anything, but they actually asked me if I can describe this issue a little bit more or what's not that good about the display or anything like that. And for me, it was very hard because I said to them, it's not something that I can really show off on video and it's not something that I can really measure, but what the gray whale seems to be, and I've seen it, especially since on the first day when I've got this device, I've talked about the phone dimming again. It's not really dimming, but what it seems to do under a brightness of about 40%, so let's say 35%, it seems to put on a very, very subtle gray whale over the display that just kind of takes away the pop, kind of the brilliance of the display. Now I'm gonna tell you why I don't think it's a big issue for me. Well, if I use 40% of brightness, the brilliance is absolutely there. And 40% brightness corresponds to 35% brightness on my OnePlus 5T, which is anyways the brightness that I always use. So when I set the device just as bright as every other review device, which is in this case on the Sony 40%, I didn't have the issue. But I did check it lower just because I always want to narrow down which is the brightness that I want to use on a phone. And when I had, for example, 30% or 35%, I noticed that the display just wasn't quite as amazing anymore. There was just something that I was missing. And I will give you a little bit of some daily life experiences a little bit later on. But that's just something that we have to keep in mind, because actually I have to say one thing. I got an update yesterday and it seems that maybe that's just in my head because I want it to be there. The issue is less obvious now, but I've already read from a few people that it's absolutely a no-go. So let's try to uncover this mystery, and this video will be a little bit underexposed just so you can see the differences a little bit earlier. And what I want to give you now is some numbers so we have a base. With my lux meter, I measured the maximum brightness on white for the Sony Xperia XZ3, the 5T from OnePlus, and the Sony, the iPhone XS. And here is what numbers I got. At 100%, the XZ3 has 622 lux, the 5T has 725, and the XS has 550. Now what I have to tell you is that the difference from 600 to 725, or this difference, is way less obvious than it is from 550 to 625. So I would say if you have a device with 600 lux, sunlight readability shouldn't be an issue. Normal phones on average have about 450, 480. 550 is still absolutely okay. And then, for example, 50%, we have 307, and 350, 256. Now the important ones are on the Sony 40%, on the 5T, because that's kind of corresponding, 35%, and I've set the iPhone XS to the brightness, so they are all at about 204, 240. So I measured that, and later on I will give you some real life samples. As you can see though, the minimum brightness on the Sony is 26. I couldn't really measure any lower. For the 5T it's 31, and the XS I just couldn't measure anymore. So that's where this part ends for now. Now let's turn them on, and like I said, they're all calibrated to 240 lux. So they should be all pretty much the same. And I'm just gonna use the white Google page so you can actually do the test on your own. I will also turn off the light so you can see the contrast a little bit more. Now what is also obvious, since the Sony has a Quad HD display, it just doesn't show more as much as the 1080p display. Obviously you can see that it's always a thing that's a camera thing. Once I put them to the sides, it gets a little bit more obvious on one on the other. But usually the lower the rest, the more you see. That's the 1080p display on the 5T, and the little bit over 1080p display on the iPhone X. But we should take a look at the whites now, because we are at 40%, where the whale is not even there yet. And you can see, at least from my standpoint, that the Sony has the cleanest, clearest, and in my opinion, nicest white. Obviously, at least these two offer a white balance this has True Tone, which is actually turned off because I think True Tone is just too yellow, and you can see a little bit of yellowness on the iPhone screen. The 5T looks a little bit reddish, which in reality actually looks a little bit more red, a little bit more yellow on the display. Now here, at least for me, definitely the Sony wins, but it's not that the other one have a bad white. Now let's get into the issue era. And I'm gonna put this iPhone away because I don't really have those values, because I can't really set them up because I don't have a tool. Now let's use 30%, where the veil should be obvious already, and 25, which is the same value on the OnePlus 5T, and compare these once again. Now on the 5T, I've never heard anyone talking about an issue with the brightness or that the display gets dull. And let me tell you, let me know what you think, because what I see is that still obviously the 5T looks a little bit more reddish, which is a little bit more yellowy, and the Sony looks still super clean with a super nice white. Yes, I hope you can see that. So let's go even a little bit lower. Let's go to 20%, and let's go to 15%, which is also corresponding about that on both. And now here's the thing, people now say that the Sony display looks unacceptably dull, but at least on the video this looks more dull to me. Now we could also use some normal measurements. Let's go back to 30% and let's go back to 25%, and let's look at some real life samples. Okay. And then you can actually see how good you think is the display, or which one you like more. Obviously the Sony should have a better display. It's higher res, it's maybe higher quality. Let's do the same on the iPhone, if that works out. The order unfortunately is not the same, so we have to find that picture. Okay, so here we have 3 times the same picture. I mean, colors are a little bit more saturated on the Sony. That's because I use the super vivid mode. All look great in terms of colors. None of them looks bad. I mean, all of them are absolutely great. Obviously, yeah, we can see. I mean, it's very, very hard to show this on video, especially since this video is just 1080p. It's hard to see a difference. I mean, colors are a little bit different, obvious. The sharpness is something that will be hard to show off because, I mean, that's actually the biggest difference for me. If I use the Sony phone, I mean, the sharpness is noticeably better. I mean, you see, and people say there is no difference between, but I know this is not going to be visible. But if you compare these, come on. I mean, I think even on video it's visible that the Sony looks higher res. Here you can see the text gets a little bit blurry, where it, yeah, that's also the autofocus. I mean, yeah, it's almost impossible to show off. And what I'm gonna tell you right now is what I did. For the first day at work, I used the Sony with a brightness of 40%. And but I really mean every time I turned on the display, I thought, wow, it is so nice and brilliant, so vivid. And then I thought, yes, because I have a higher brightness than I usually have, and that's why it looks a little bit more pleasing, because I didn't back then make the measurements yet. Now I know that I actually used it with 40%, which is the same brightness that I use with my OnePlus anyways. So it looked more brilliant. It looked nicer because I thought it would. At least brighter, which it actually isn't. Now what I did then, yesterday and today, I used a brightness of 30 and 35% to see if I see a difference. And I have to say, yes, I noticed, not really a veil, but I noticed that the display just loses its vibrance, it loses its brilliance, it loses the spectacularness, if that's even a word. So I have to say, if I use this display like I would anyways, with 40%, I'm blown away. Colors are great. White is the cleanest as you have seen by default, even though you can change it if you want something, but it's not too cold, it's not too warm, out of the box. Brilliant colors. If you want more natural, change it in the settings. I mean, the distortion on the sides isn't a big thing, and what I've actually noticed that the color distortion on the sides is actually less than on Samsung phones. Obviously the glare is still a thing, but I have to say this. If I would use a lower brightness, and I've heard people that use auto brightness on the Sony, which seems to be generally too low, then I would not really enjoy this display. But that's also a thing. I would not really enjoy any display if it would be of lower brightness. Because let's, for example, no, it won't be visible on video. But if I, for example, put the Sony now to 20%, and if I put this to 15%, and then I check some photos. And if I would just put them side by side on here now and look at them, I would not really like both of them because both look a little bit dull. I mean, I can get closer. And like I said, with the same brightness, if we switch, I mean, tell me what you want, but I think the Sony looks still more vibrant. So that's now where I don't really see why people have an issue with that. So maybe actually the last update fixed the issue, because it seems less. I mean, I've seen a little bit of a switch once I entered the first time an app. It looked like there is a minimal gray filter and the display just looked nice pleasing anymore. I didn't really notice this anymore today. When I used it today, I was fine. Didn't see an issue with it. But it just wasn't pleasing. It wasn't just what it is right now. Super vibrant, super vivid. That's because I'm not used to a brightness that is lower. So on every other phone, if I would use that brightness, and I actually have to say this, the iPhone, when I use it, even at noticeably higher brightness levels than the other two ones, it still looks actually more dull. So this is not a scientific proof that the veil is not an issue or that it's not there. I can also actually even tell if the update fixed it because I didn't have enough time with the lower brightness, because before the update came, I used it already with a brightness of 40% all the time, so I didn't see the veil. And that's why I can't really say if the veil would have still been an issue after a few days since the update just came. So this is just my personal opinion. You let me know if you actually have one, if you still see it, if you got the update already, if it's something big, and maybe make some measurements or check it with whatever screen you want to, and let me know what you think, because my standpoint is I don't like really the display a lot under a brightness of 40%. But that is a brightness that I personally wouldn't really use that much anyways. I mean, at whatever time of day, if it's night, if it's day, if it's brighter, I use the same brightness all the time. That's just how I keep a consistent track of the battery life for all devices, so it's always the same standpoint. That's why I use 40% anyways, where I think the display is pretty much the best display I've seen. It's on par with the Note 9, and I still think it's absolutely beautiful. Now for the review, I'm really still debating if I will give it 5 gold stars or 5 stars, just normal ones, because if the weight is a thing, which is hard to tell yet still, because I will need a little bit more time to properly check what it is. Maybe some input from your side, maybe some forums, maybe actually Sony will respond in time so we get to the ground of it, because I still have to say the display does not bother me at all. I'm super satisfied with it, but at least from what I've seen on the first day and using it for 2 days with a lower brightness than I usually do, I wasn't impressed. But I don't think any display at that brightness would have impressed me, just because that's not what my eyes are used to. And that's why I'm personally not quite sure why some people have an issue with that. If we've seen the numbers, the brightness is the same as on any other phone at that kind of relation. So it, even though with the same value, so both at 240 lux, not just on video, but my own eyes see this, the Sony looks actually a little bit more vibrant. Yeah, it's not really a super satisfying answer. I'm just gonna tell you this, obviously the XZ3 display is way better than the 5T, that's not a discussion. The 5T is known for being the best display, but if I, for example, use the iPhone display, I would prefer this one a lot more, because this looks kind of dull all the time. Even at very high brightnesses, this kind of glossy feel is gone. Maybe because they use some little bit more of a glare protection or something like that, a glare coating that kind of prevents it shining so much. Because it is just a thing. The more a display has glare or kind of shines, the cleaner it is, the easier it is to look at it. That's why, for example, if you would use a matte laptop and you would use a glare laptop, always the glare one, the glossy one, looks way more appealing. It looks sharper, it looks more vibrant, it looks more contrasty. That's just because any sort of matte takes away from the light reflections and so on. And to me, at least on the first day when I had it at 30%, it looked like they put a software filter over it to maybe kind of mimic that effect. I need a few more days to check that, because I don't really see it much now. Because when I look now at it, it just looks less bright, but it doesn't look like it completely lost its vibrancy. At least on video it's not visible. So I'm not 100% sure what's going on. And I will definitely answer all of this, what you will ask me in this video, in the comments, but also in the final review. But so far, at least with my normal use, with the normal reviewing process that I have, nothing has really changed. Because if I would review this phone with the same brightness that I do with every phone, it would be monster display. And I can't really knock it because it's not that great with low brightnesses if I never used really those on any other phone. I mean, I don't really know if this video was helpful to you at all or not. And that's why I said I need some input from what you think, because I don't know. We'll see. Okay, until next time. Bye.